Welcome, and greetings to all. I am Shen Long Pendragon, the Lore Master. So as always, a quick disclaimer here. This is a non-profit video. I do not own the story or the images in this video. The credit for these all belong to their original sources. So ladies and gentlemen, I do apologise for the delay in getting this out to you. There was unfortunately one or two technical problems after the last video, which are thankfully now resolved. And also I've been a bit busy the last month, so I haven't had time, I'm afraid. But I'm now back, and I'm going to try and keep to a sort of schedule of at least 1 to 2 videos a month. Hopefully that will keep everything going smoothly. Anyway, this is the first top 10 video that I'm going to be doing. And as you've seen from the title, I'm going to be talking about my personal top 10 favourite creatures from Chinese mythology. Obviously this is just my own personal opinion on the list. If there's any creatures here you felt should be included, or you would have liked to have been included, or if you'd like me to do a separate video on, then by all means please let me know in the comment section. And without further ado, let us continue. Number 10. The Luduan. The Luduan is described as an auspicious creature with a green coat, the tail of a horse, and a single horn upon its head. Also known as a truth-seeking beast, this creature has the ability to detect any lie. It has also the ability to travel up to 9,000 kilometers in a single day, as well as being able to speak all world languages. It's often depicted as a creature representing enlightened rule. Probably the most famous encounter a person supposedly had with one of these creatures was, believe it or not, the great conqueror Genghis Khan. One day, one of these creatures supposedly approached him and tried to persuade him in order to give up his ambition of conquering India. And as it turns out, Genghis Khan never actually did conquer India. He instead focused his efforts primarily in China and the Middle East. The enlightened rule aspect of this creature was further enhanced by its depictions in incense burners, which were often found in imperial palaces. This specific incense burner, I believe, is a replica of one that was found in the throne room of the Emperor's Hall of Supreme Harmony. Number 9. Xiezhi or Xiezhi. This creature is described as resembling an ox or a goat, with dark fur covering its body, bright eyes, and a single horn upon its head. Statues and depictions of this creature are often associated with courthouses and places where officials gathered. The reason being is that this creature is considered to be a beast of justice. It has the ability to seek out and detect lies and corruption. When it comes across those it deems as evil, corrupt, or compulsive liars, it uses its single horn to ram them, and essentially killing them, and then devours them. Hence it's seen as this symbol of justice and is often depicted at these particular places such as courthouses. The bronze statue that you saw a minute ago is an example of such a creature found in the Forbidden City in Beijing. Number 8. Pixiu. As with the previous two examples, the Pixiu is not limited to just China. Examples of these have been found throughout Asia. The Pixiu itself is described as a hybrid creature with having both a land and a sea variant. Typically it's shown as a winged lion. These creatures continue to be popular icons even today. They are seen as the guardians of Feng Shui and are particularly important to those who seek financial gain or who want to protect their financial wealth or protect the Feng Shui of their home. They are seen as having mystical powers capable of drawing Xiezhi or wealth from all directions. These are particularly useful for people who are having a bad year. It's important to know that one particular aspect of these creatures is that they have a voracious appetite exclusively for gold, silver, and jewels. So as a result, they are once again seen as an auspicious creature. They typically are depicted in pairs, as you see here. A female version, known as Baishe, whose job it is to ward off evil spirits and guard the wealth of the household. Meanwhile, her male counterpart, Tianlu, goes out into the world seeking wealth. When he finds it, he brings it back home to his master's house, where his female counterpart will guard it, while he goes out to search for more. And such, this prevents wealth from flowing away. One depiction of this creature that you may not be aware of is from the Disney 1998 film Mulan. Now, those of you who have seen this movie, you'll recognize that Mulan has a rather ornate sword. On the hilt of this sword, you actually see a face of this creature being depicted. Number 7. The Longma. The Longma, or dragon horse, is described as a horse-like creature with dragon scales, sometimes depicted with a dragon-like head, and often depicted with wings. However, it should be pointed out that not all depictions of the Longma are shown with wings. It is often confused for a very similar creature known as the Qilin. However, they are actually two different creatures, and I will show you depictions of a Qilin in a few minutes. Witnessing or seeing a Longma was considered to be a very good omen in China, representing a legendary sage ruler, particularly one of the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors. Variations of this creature are also shown in Japan, and in fact, the popular Japanese game Shogi depicts a piece referred to as a Ryuma, or again, dragon horse. The Longma is interconnected to traditional Chinese beliefs when it comes to dragons and horses. For example, early subjects within the Zhou Li, or rites of Zhou, differentiates names for horses based on their different heights and lengths, measured in traditional Chinese foot, also sometimes referred to as qi. Historically, this qi is about 23 to 33 centimeters. Horses which are up to 8 feet tall are often given the name long or dragon. Those up to 7 feet tall are lai, and those up to 6 feet tall are ma, or horse. Various different depictions of this with the dragon-like head typically originate with the Han Dynasty. However, with the Tang Dynasty, many years later, whose military tactics relied very heavily on cavalry, it was actually became a very, very important symbol. And in fact, there was actually a very famous steed in the Tang Dynasty, I believe belonging to Tang Sanjiang. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, and again, if I am making any mistakes on the pronunciation, I do apologise. If I've made a mistake anywhere, someone please do feel free to correct me in the comments. Anyway, moving swiftly on, Tang Sanjiang's famous horse was known as Bai Li Longma, or White Dragon Horse, and again, I really hope I pronounced that correctly. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, sorry about that little slight tangent. I do promise I won't have many of those here. Anyway, let's move swiftly on to the next creature on this list. Number 6. Baishe Niangniang, or Baishe. More commonly known to the public as the White Snake or the White Serpent. This creature is, I'm pretty sure to most of you, not surprised at being on this list, and in all honesty really requires no introduction, having appeared in untold numbers of major Chinese operas, stage performances, and various movies and TV shows throughout modern pop culture. Honestly, ladies and gentlemen, I'm only going to skim very briefly over this creature because it's such a good story that I think it deserves its own video, in all true honesty. But in a very brief summary, the story follows the White Snake, who at one point saves her adopted sister, the Green Snake, and the two of them eventually come across this young gentleman here, known as Xiezhi. Eventually, the White Snake and Xiezhi fall in love and have a child together, and go through various trials and tribulations until they either, depending on what version of the story you read, either end up dead, separated, or happily married together. I will go over one of the original Chinese opera versions of this for you in a different video, but not here. It will take far too long, I'm afraid, to do it as part of this video. So, ladies and gentlemen, please allow me a very brief tangent here. I just want to highlight something about demonology comparing East and West. In the West, demons, monsters, etc. are all depicted as either evil or savage creatures. That's not always the case in the East. In the East, they're sometimes depicted as evil, sometimes depicted as benign, sometimes depicted as neutral. In other words, they don't really care either way. The white and green snakes particularly fall in this neutral category, more aligned towards a good characteristic, so they're halfway between good and neutral. However, they are willing to do things that humans would probably view as evil or wicked or just very destructive in order to achieve their goals, as is seen here, where they're actually flooding a valley, which results in the death of many humans. However, this act was done in order to save a particular human, being the White Snake's husband. So that's one aspect I did want to highlight here, is East and West have very different ideas when it comes to demonology. This is very, very pronounced when it comes to Japan and yokai culture. I will eventually go on to describe yokai and various different aspects of them. But again, in a very brief term, when you actually look at yokai and kami, who are divine spirits typically worshipped at shrines, often seen as local land gods or gods in total, and in fact, Japanese Christians refer to God as kami. It's just a translation of the word. But coming back to the point, in traditional Japanese beliefs, the only real difference between a kami and a yokai is really one is worshipped while the other is not. That's the only real difference between the two. And you see that again in Korean, Chinese, Thai, and other sort of mythologies. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to that brief tangent. I will now get back to the list. Number 5, the Qilin. So, as I promised, it was coming. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the Qilin. It is another hybrid or chimera-like creature within Chinese mythology, and again, it belongs into the family of one-horned beasts, as I should say. It is sometimes depicted as having a single horn. This particular statue, as you can see, is depicting as having two, so it really just depends on the era of the depiction as to whether or not it has one horn or two. I should point out that this particular creature is the one that's generally referred to as the Chinese unicorn. Variations of this creature do appear in Japan, where I believe it is called the Qilin. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think a lot of you would probably not be surprised that this creature is on this list. I mean, it really doesn't need much of an introduction, as I'm sure a lot of you do know. It's a very famous creature. It's seen in a lot of different movies, TV shows, artworks, etc., etc. Believe it or not, when it's observed or seen, or when it appears somewhere, it's supposedly meant to represent the arrival or imminent arrival of an illustrious sage or ruler. However, it should be pointed out, it can also mean the passing or death of said sage or illustrious ruler. So we need to watch out for that. One aspect about this creature I think I should mention is related to an upcoming game, believe it or not. Now, I'm sure the avid gamers of you out there are aware that a faction called Grand Cathay was recently announced for the upcoming Warhammer Total War 3. Now, I'm particularly interested in this faction, as I'm sure you're aware. And believe it or not, the actual name, Grand Cathay, the word Cathay itself is actually a European word that I think originates in Italy or Germany. Someone again correct me if I'm wrong here, but it always actually represents northern China. Now, in the trailer for Grand Cathay, in the game itself, certain soldiers were seen flying through the sky on creatures which represented horses with wings. Yes, I think a lot of you will see where this is going. A lot of people who reviewed that trailer, I believe, actually initially confused them for being Qilin. However, the producers actually corrected themselves in an article and claimed that they are Longma. I'm very pleased that they made this correction, particularly because Longma are, as I said earlier, are sometimes depicted with wings, whereas Qilin are never shown with wings. However, there's another aspect that I should point out here. Although I will be one of the first to admit I think having Qilin in Warhammer Total War 3 would be pretty cool for Grand Cathay, it also doesn't make a lot of sense. And please let me explain myself here. Qilin are pacifists, therefore it makes absolutely no sense that they would be anywhere near a battle. These creatures are in fact so against violence that they've trained themselves to run through the clouds and run through the sky because they can't bring themselves to even harm the grass on the ground. They are completely against violence, conflict of any regard, and as I've already said, they are 100% pacifists. So it would make more sense if they appeared in a game which is very much centered around warfare. If they did appear in it, it would make much more sense for them to be some sort of healer unit or supporting unit rather than a frontline combatant, or again, if you were to do them like a mount, for example, you'd be better doing it for a support mount rather than somebody who's actually going to be in the fighting, because these creatures, as I said, they don't like violence, so having them in a game for warfare just really doesn't make a lot of sense historically or in terms of their mythology. Again, that is just my opinion. Creative Assembly may surprise us and put them in anyway. If you disagree with me, then by all means feel free to disagree with me, but I can assure you that these creatures are pacifists. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to that tangent. Let's once again move swiftly on. Number 4. Huli Jing. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are not surprised to see fox spirits appearing on this list. They play a very important role in Asian cultures, particularly within China and Japan, and indeed in Korea. Now, a lot of you are probably more aware of them by their Japanese name, Kitsune. However, Kitsune can not only just mean fox spirit, it also means a generic fox as well. Now, this particular creature, as you can see, can have up to 9 tails, and typically the more tails this creature has, the more powerful and the older they are. And believe it or not, a YouTuber called Gaijin Goomba did a very, very good video not that long ago on Kitsune in Japanese culture. If you want to learn more about these creatures, I highly recommend you go check his video out. It is really good. So, much like their Kitsune counterparts, Huli Jing have the ability to transform, typically into young women. Based on the number of tails can also dictate the power of these creatures, so typically the older the fox is, generally, the more beautiful they look in their human form. Now, as I've already said, although they typically appear as women when they transform, I think there is a possibility of a number of stories where they do turn into men. However, I can't confirm that at this time. If somebody does know a case of this, then please do let me know in the comments. I do remember one story though. Now, please bear with me though, I can't remember its origin, whether it's from China, Korea, or Japan, but there was a gentleman that once saw one of these creatures transforming into their human form. What he supposedly described was a fox wearing a skull and then covering itself with leaves. This creature then transformed into a young woman. One interesting aspect about this story, again, as you can guess, which is quite common with these sort of creatures in Asian mythology, is that they can be either good or evil. And probably the most famous one of these creatures is unfortunately very, very evil indeed. So, ladies and gentlemen, this particular evil fox spirit in China was known as Daji, and was in fact the favourite consort of King Zhou of Sheng. He was in fact the last king of the Shang dynasty within ancient China. Unfortunately, this king does die, and Daji, according to the stories, was to blame through her demonic influence, more or less siphoning off his life force, causing illness, I believe, in the original story. In fact, during the Song dynasty, there was actually a movement to quell cults that were dedicated to her worship. Unfortunately, for the Song, though, they were ultimately unsuccessful in this attempt, and many artworks, depictions, statues, etc. of Daji exist even today. However, I should also point out that the image actually earlier that you saw of that woman in the last slide, that was actually a painting of Daji herself. Daji's reign of terror, however, does not end in China. She did continue on to Korea and eventually to Japan, and throughout Asia she did spread more or less the exact same thing. She comes into contact with wealthy men, often rulers, lords, or emperors, kings, and tries to worm her way into the court before eventually being driven out. Her final gambit did take place in Japan, where she became the consort of Emperor Konoe. Now, in Japan, I believe she assumed the name, and again, please help me if I'm pronouncing this incorrectly, Tama no Mai, I believe is, I think, how it's pronounced. Again, if I am pronouncing that wrong, please correct me. Much like she had done throughout her entire reign of terror throughout Asia, she causes the death of Emperor Konoe through her demonic influence by siphoning off his life force, and unfortunately he succumbs to illness and dies. Now, a lot of you might recognize that name of hers, Tama Mo no Mai, from the very popular franchise Fate, where she is indeed a character. However, I think her Fate character is depicted as being not evil, or not as evil as she was depicted in the original historical texts. Again, I've not gotten very far with Fate, so again, please correct me if I'm wrong there. Moving swiftly on, though, after the Emperor Konoe's death, the fox spirit, as we'll just call her because I keep pronouncing the name incorrectly, so the fox spirit eventually does flee the court. She is hotly pursued by the Emperor's samurai, who have actually managed to wound her. As the hunt is drawing to a close and the samurai drawing near, she actually appears in the dream of one of these samurai, asking and begging for her life. When he finds her the next day, he decides to avenge his lord, his emperor, and actually does end up killing her, thus ending the reign of this particularly malicious fox spirit. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for sticking with me so far. This video has been a little bit longer than expected, but we're now down to the final three. And number 3 on our list is the Guardian Lion, or Guardian Lions. Now, I'm pretty sure that this creature, like everything in our top 3, really doesn't need much of an introduction. I'm sure we've all seen depictions of this creature somewhere before. It's sometimes referred to as the Temple Lion, the Temple Dog, the Fu Dog, the Lion Dog, or generally the Temple Guardians. It has various different names, depending on where you look. And variations of this creature are shown throughout Asia. So, ladies and gentlemen, as I've already said, these guys really don't need much of an introduction, so this is going to be quite brief. They always appear in pairs, a male and a female. The male, in this case you see him on the right, is always shown with some kind of ball under his paw. The female, on the other hand, in this case we look at her on the left, is always shown either with a cub or nothing under her paws. These creatures are always represented as either being angry or fierce, and typically being beefy and strong, because they are guardians. They're meant to ward off evil spirits or dissuade any malicious demons, etc., from entering the building, the place of worship, the property, etc., etc. They're generally shown outside places of worship or palaces or the homes of wealthy individuals. The bronze statue that you saw a minute ago is in fact actually a photograph of the female of the pair outside well, I don't say outside, but it's within the walls of the Forbidden City in China, specifically Beijing. Number 2. The Fenghuang, or Chinese Phoenix. The Chinese or Oriental Phoenix has a very superficial connection with Western phoenixes. They're not really all that similar in terms of their mythology, I'm afraid. However, they do have a very, very similar appearance, which is where the term comes from. The Fenghuang in itself is actually considered to be a regal bird, and is typically shown that it reigns over all of the birds, with males typically being called Feng and females typically being called Huang. At some point in its history, the Fenghuang stopped being depicted in both a male and a female aspect, and instead took on a very major role as an icon depicting femininity and the female gender in general. That is not to say, however, there aren't male variants of this creature, it's just the majority of them are depicted as female. The reason for this is that they're typically paired with dragons. In this case, the dragon is representative of male, whereas the Fenghuang is representative of female. Variations of this creature are shown in Vietnam, Japan, and Korea, as well as other Asian cultures. Ladies and gentlemen, here we come to our number 1, a creature that really needs no introduction in any way, shape, or form. It is by far the most famous creature in Chinese mythology, and arguably is the most famous mythological creature in the world. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we have the dragon, or to give it its Chinese name, the Long. While Western dragons are depicted as large, fire-breathing, powerful reptilian creatures that soar through the sky on bat-like wings, Chinese dragons are much longer, more elegant, snake-like creatures, the claws of a tiger, the scales of a fish, the face of a camel, and the horns of a deer. Within their face burns bright the eyes of a demon that judge humanity. Those that attract the dragon's ire invite terrible vengeance and retribution through storm and flood, for these creatures were the master of the elements and weather. Many people would try to appease the dragons by bringing them sacrifices or gifts. The 4 greatest of their kind were the Dragon Kings. Each one controlled a large body of water known as the North, South, East, and West Seas. In fact, every body of water within China was believed to have its own dragon, or at least be associated with a dragon. While dragons were often vengeful, they were not always evil. Many were benign and forgiving of humanity. They were willing to share knowledge and wisdom, and even provide help when need be. They were seen as great sages, wise scholars, and powerful warriors. While many stories exist of the 4 Dragon Kings, a separate story shows that there is only one true dragon in Chinese mythology, and this dragon has 9 sons. For many centuries, the dragon was, and continues to be to this day, the most important icon and symbol of Chinese culture and heritage. For many, many generations, only the emperor could wear this important, prestigious symbol on his person. The Chinese dragon is often depicted with 5 toes on each feet. However, other variations have 4 or even 3 on their feet. The belief was that the supreme dragons within China, the royal dragon or imperial dragon, has these 5-toed feet. However, the further away from China, or the lower the rank of the dragon got, the less toes it would have on its feet, until eventually it had no toes and the dragon would simply fall over. We can see here this staircase leading up to the Hall of Supreme Harmony in the Emperor's Palace in Forbidden City. This particular hall was once the throne room. As we can see, the way is guarded by numerous dragon statues, which helps elaborate that this is the abode of the Emperor, or at least it once was. Dragon symbol of this type is very, very important, not only in Chinese culture, but also in that of Japan and Korea. Dragons in China are particularly shown chasing after a circular object. There are numerous ideas as to what this object might be, but the most popular identify it as a pearl of wisdom. Pearl of wisdom was said to be the dragon's most precious treasure, for it contained all the world's knowledge and wisdom, something dragons coveted above all else. Another idea as to what this object might be was an egg. Dragons chase after and guard it preciously and covetously because they want to preserve the future of their kind. There are numerous types of dragon within Chinese culture, such as the Tianlong or the Shenlong. And now I will cover all these different variations in a separate video, but I won't do it here, I'm afraid. There are too many to cover to do all justice in this segment. And so, ladies and gentlemen, closing the book on this chapter in our videos, we come to the end. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening. I do hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, then please remember to like and subscribe for more lore, myths, legends, and stories. I am Shenlong Pendragon. Until next time, knowledge is power.